Only a few more hours until the blue-white game. It is Thursday. We are talking about what you want to hear. The BWI mailbag show is here. Also, post-practice update with senior editor Nate Bauer. Nate, how you doing today? How are you doing after practice yesterday? Always a long night for us.
Yeah, I'm doing well. It concerns me when you say a few more hours and it's like 48 because I need all of those 48 to make the most of the blue-white game and the blue-white weekend that is coming.
Yep. And we are going to get to some of your questions about Blue-White Weekend, some things around the game, some things that aren't around the game, all of that coming up on the Mailbag Show. As always, subscribe here to Blue-White Illustrated on YouTube so you don't miss anything like the highlights we dropped last night. Nate, you made a guest appearance on the highlights, actually, from our show yesterday.
Wow.
So we're always doing some new stuff. We're always trying to find new angles to show you something from practice. And, of course, here on YouTube, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Sign up for just $1. Get 12 months of access. So one of the things that happened yesterday was things were a little delayed. And when that happens, I get back here to my studio a little bit later, which means I get to everything a little bit later, which means that I did not get to go to the post-practice interview session yesterday because I was completing said highlights and recap of... So what I'm saying is I'm very jealous of you and that you were able to still go. So tell me, what stood out to you yesterday being at practice where I was not?
Yeah, just for the record, that was late too. So it's just a shift. The block of time in the middle stays the same. It's just a matter of bumping things back.
We're going with it was earlier than expected because that's the way that's the way that I can justify the fact that I didn't make it there, which I'm very upset about.
It's
not that I'm slow.
It's 12 minutes of conversation. I wouldn't spend too much time worrying about it. No, I thought James Franklin addressed a lot of the major topics, right? He was asked a great question by Ben Jones about really if he knows more about this team now than he did at the start of spring practice, right? And I wrote about it. Like the big topics of conversation on March 21 when Penn State started its spring practices were, Tyler Elsdon and Kobe King at middle linebacker, transitioning to Manny Diaz and the defense. I know that we've talked about it, and I know that it's been a subject that has carried weight, certainly among Penn State fans. But I almost feel like it's more at the forefront of James Franklin's mind than even that. Right, like this is a significant undertaking, and Penn State's been so good defensively, and it's been so consistent.
Yep.
That it's just almost kind of like a matter of fact or a matter of course that Penn State will just continue to be good at defense, even though they're making this major change from Brent Pry to Manny Diaz.
Yeah, and losing talent at the same time, losing key starters.
No doubt. It's like but it's almost treated as though it's just a given that they'll continue to be good. And I think I'm, certainly as guilty of it as anybody else in terms of phrasing it that way. So
can I interject there? It is interesting how that has changed over time and this kind of goes to James Franklin in these situations downplaying or at least touting the similarity between Brent Pry and Manny Diaz. And then when the nuts and bolts of this is now a new defensive coordinator who is coming in and installing an entirely new defense, we are not keeping anything from before. This is all Manny Diaz doing what he does. Then we get into the discussion of guys are playing a little slower. We're changing how these things are working. And so we start with the idea of seamless transition, and then we get into the reality of the transition, which is not seamless.
Yeah. No, and the personnel that's doing it are working through their own transitions anyway.
Yeah.
Right? Like Curtis Jacobs is switching positions. So he's a good player, good returning, experienced veteran player that Penn State has on defense. Tig Brown, same deal, right? Joey Porter Jr. All of these guys who normally you would look at as okay, these are kind of the stable veteran voices in the room.
Yeah.
They still are, for sure. There's no question at what their standing is within the program and within the defense, but they're going through the same shift really in mentality and approach as the younger guys. So it's a big process, and it's a big undertaking that I think James Franklin came out of the spring, or is coming out of the spring, feeling pretty good about, kind of where they stand going into the summer.
Yeah, it's hard, and this is kind of what James Franklin said the last couple of weeks is, to paraphrase, it's hard to be a leader when you're learning and making mistakes too. Usually being a leader means that you are first and foremost with your play exemplary. And if you aren't comfortable and teaching other guys the thing you're learning, it becomes more difficult. Although it is kind of an interesting thing where teaching somebody can help you learn it better, because if you can explain something, it means you really know it. So that's kind of the dichotomy there, which it sounds like has improved over the last 4 or 5 weeks. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think that example that I brought up last week or the week before, and this may be a little bit of projecting, but to your point, the leaders can't go through the stripping the ball drill and do it correctly the way that Manny Diaz wants it to be done, because they've never done it before for Manny Diaz.
Yeah.
And so rather than setting that tone and being able to establish from the very first rep, hey guys, this is how it's done because I know what Manny Diaz wants. Those guys are in the same boat. John Sutherland is in the same boat as, Kobe King. So that I think that plays an impact, in how they approach things.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. When we get to one of the other things I thought was interesting is James Franklin mentioned specifics about some injuries, because it seems like we're on the other side of them. So we learned a little more about the issues on the offensive line, who has been there, and a couple people maybe who weren't. So what was your takeaway on that conversation and letting that sort of deflating that balloon a little bit?
So the fact that he pointed out 3 players as having taken and been available throughout the spring, right? And so they were Juice Scruggs, Caden Wallace, and Olu Fashanu, which on its face says, oh, okay, like these guys made big improvements. They were able to develop and
interesting. It's like somebody asked a question about that last week.
Somebody on this show?
Somebody maybe. I don't know. Who knows?
Anyway,
continue with your point.
But no, there's a counterbalance to that point, right? Which is, if those are the 3 that he's pointing out as having been through all of spring practice without a hiccup, guess what? That means that there's another 8 who did not have that experience.
Yep.
And so there's a downside of, and we know this has been well covered at this point, but Penn State's thin on the offensive line as it is this spring. That they're looking forward, obviously, to some freshmen coming in and a big transfer in Hunter Norzad.
Yeah.
But you still want development to happen for the Landon Tengwall.
Yep.
You still want development to happen for a Sal Wormley, right?
Yep.
And so their situations are different, but Tengwall was the one who was asked about specifically last night, and Franklin was very clear that Tengwall has missed practices this spring due to injury, some bumps and bruises, I think he called it. So that's this is key development time that wasn't able to happen for him for the duration of the spring.
Yeah. So another side effect of this shorthandedness at the offensive line that I've observed during practice is they don't have a full defensive simulation when they're going through technical drills. So you've got, offensive linemen playing linebacker and defensive tackle to simulate the guys you're going to go block. Mm-hmm. You got some tackles or you got some guards doing their reps on air because there isn't a lineman available for them to push against. So I think that's a very interesting part about saying, like, they're thin on the offensive line. It's affecting certain things like, how you do the technical part when you're just working inside your own group if you don't have 10 players to cycle through. Also, and I think this is a very important point, And a critical one for the Nittany Lions next fall is that, and James Franklin says, those guys took a big step forward because they were getting a lot of reps. If there were guys that had to get those reps and had to improve or had to, fill critical roles, it would be your 2 starting tackles and your center who's moving from guard. So they could not have had it go better in a bad situation of Fashanu going into his first year starting, Wallace, who needed to improve, and Scruggs, who's always had talent but needs this new position and needs to really settle himself in as the leader of the interior. That's really critical because they have depth at guard. That's really the story, is that they've got maybe 4 guys that can all compete to start. And that was one of the things James Franklin said, is that guard position is going to be a battle in the fall.
Yep.
So
which is what they want.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's not a bad thing. And now there's a little bit of James Franklin doesn't necessarily crown winners of like position battles and that kind of stuff. They want to establish a culture of competition throughout the program. But he more or less said, Caden Wallace is the starting right tackle.
Yep.
Olu Fashanu is the starting left tackle. Drew Scruggs is the starting center.
It'd be hard for anybody to come in and unseat them, basically.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And by the way, the guys that are coming into those positions, especially a tackle, need development time. So that's not even in the realm of if they were bringing in guys that could compete. Maybe that's a different story, but there really isn't going to be. I don't foresee anybody on the roster being able to do that right away at that tackle position, unless they were to bring in a transfer. And then who knows? But we have yet to see any movement in the portal in that area. Any last things before we get to our questions?
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think of, some of the things that I brought up in my notes last night. I mean, I think one thing that I didn't was Nick Tarburton as being kind of a standout this spring in terms of what he represents, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't know that he has, like quick changed into a different person.
Right.
He's not a totally different
he didn't
player.
pull off the suit and have a red S under there. He's not somebody
Correct.
totally different. Yeah.
Correct. But he's reliable. And that's such a it's so simple, but it's such a huge part of football at this level is just providing that. And I think that's what it is, right?
Consistency, reliability, knowing what to expect. Like a one of the things you need in life, and you don't realize how bad it is till you not have it, is like reliable transportation. You might not have the sexiest car in the world, but if it runs every single day, try going without it. Because let me tell you, I'm still sore from biking to get my oil changed.
Yeah, but it was time well spent.
Yes.
Right? Like you did a nice job there. Oh, something else to bring up.
Okay, what?
He said the running backs, right? Like, and I thought this was an interesting phrase that he used, was feeling the heat. So, you got some true freshmen in Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, who, not that this is totally unexpected, but like are pressing the guys who are pretty obviously in front of them. So that's it feels like that's the first time that he said it in those terms of, hey, like there are reps at risk here. And these guys, the young guys, have been so good or good enough this spring to establish that they're part of the equation that, it jeopardizes some of those reps and some of those carries that otherwise you might think are a given, right? For some of the guys who are returning.
Yep. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch during the blue-white game how that all works out, how we see all of that happen in whatever form or fashion it happens. But it feels like you got to make a play on every play if you're going to be out there with 4 or 5 guys deep at that position. And that feeling immediately, I go back to the Wisconsin game with Kevon Lee, because I think he came out with that urgency. And that forced him to do some things out of structure that got him put back on the bench. So how do you manage that pressure? How do you manage that urgency and that desire to be great while still playing within the confines and the maturity of the offense? And, the goal is always that it makes everybody better. Sometimes that pressure, some guys crack. And I'm not saying that because I think Kevon Lee settled in and was better in the second half of the season, so we'll see how that happens this year if that maturity continues to compound. Okay, let's get to today's mailbag. Of course, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Sign up for just $1. The best way to get into the Lions Den message forum, because I don't know how you hack in there. But ask a question there on the BWI mailbag thread. That's the best way to get your question on the air. Or at Twitter, at Thomas Frank Carr on Twitter when I put it out Wednesday nights, or if I fall asleep watching home makeover shows when I put it up the next morning, like today. Our first question comes from Tim, who's a fan of the show, friend of the show. If 4 or 5 freshmen could play up to all Big Ten freshman level, what positions would make the most impact, and how good could Penn State be? A very interesting question, given how much talent is in the class of 2022 and how many are already a part of the equation in this particular season. Do you want to start with the most realistic players to do that, or do you want to start with the ideal situation, Nate?
I think both, right? But
right.
Ideal is probably the place to start, because that's what impacts that potential on a team-wide basis, right?
Yep.
And so to me, if I'm looking at the scope of Penn State football and what is integral to the program's success this season, it's they need effective, efficient splash plays from their defensive ends.
Yep.
And Dennis-Sutton is it, like, if you could choose one guy where they're already kind of, I don't know if thin is the right word. Certainly with the injury to Zariah Fisher, they're thinner.
Yeah.
I mean, you could not pick a more impactful freshman to come in and make a splash than Dennis-Sutton. So that's where I would start for sure.
Thin unknown commodities. I think that's a fair, because I called them thin at the position when I was thinking of known commodities, and somebody pushed back on the fact that how are they thin at the offensive line, the defensive line, linebacker? How are they thin everywhere? And it's not necessarily the numbers as much as it is the known commodities and the guys that have the talent, like Dennis-Sutton. So I think that's a clear place to start. So we're saying we need 4 or 5 freshmen to play at an all Big Ten level, right? That's kind of the threshold here.
I think so.
I'm going to go someplace different, go with somebody who is not on the roster, and I'm going to go with KJ Winston as my next guy, as a curveball, because the obvious ones are obvious, right? And you start with
but we got to knock those out. We got to hit the obvious ones.
I know, and I'm always bad at that because I always want to be smarter than everybody else. So, okay, let's go with Nick Singleton. Let's go with Nick Singleton.
Correct.
And let's be direct.
And Kaytron Allen.
Lead with the strongest. Do you think that both can be all Big Ten freshmen, though? If you had to push comes to shove, are you going to get 2 all Big Ten freshman running backs?
That seems unlikely in terms of how that all works. But I think in theory, you could have 2 true freshmen who certainly make an impact, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that could be in a variety of ways, right? Is one of those guys number 1? Is the other one number 2? Are they 1 and 3? Is somebody a kick returner? Like, any of those possibilities, I think, could come into play. But if you can get one of the 2 of those guys to be all Big Ten freshmen, like that, I mean, look, you're not all Big Ten freshmen unless you make an impact right at the position.
Yeah.
And that's a position where you can't hide it, right? Like, you will have made an actual splash in the Big Ten if you're an all Big Ten or excuse me, a freshman all Big Ten running back.
Let me paint a different picture for you. Let me paint you the picture of Nick Singleton breaking off a 75-yard run down to the 2-yard line. He comes out for a blow, and Kaytron Allen dives in for a touchdown. And if you're Kaytron Allen and you're a goal line back, Nate, it's not like the
Yeah,
fallacy.
but Singleton
the fallacy
got
here.
70 yards. Singleton got 70 yards in that equation.
Right.
Like, people are going to see that.
But people are also going to stat sheet watch when it comes to this particular conversation. And this is the fallacy of saying that all Big Ten means the best. And it could just mean that you got 5 touchdowns as a running back, but you were the third guy on the roster. Like, just from some random occurrence that you had 3 in garbage time and you had 2 big ones at the end of the season. And, I could cook up some scenario where somebody had a lot of stats that weren't necessarily reflective of their play. So when it comes to that particular position, I guess you mentioned splash plays from the defensive end, and I'd say we're on the same page if that's what Penn State needs from their running game, and that's what's going to get you the highlights and the attention and the TV exposure, which is what it's about when it comes to these all Big Ten things. So I would say that it would be very hard for Katron Allen to be that guy with his profile if he's not the lead back getting the yeoman's work. Because Singleton's going to come into the game, and with his profile, he can rip off a 60-yard run. That gets everyone's attention. That gets him more chances, too. So that would be, I guess, the way I break that down, which is to diminish Katron Allen, unfortunately, which is not really, I think, fair or accurate. But it's just the way that the voting and all these things and the impact works.
I think that the problem, T-Frank, is that you set it up with a hypothetical that's flawed in the first place.
Aren't they all?
Nobody's catching Nick Singleton. Right? Like, he had a 70-yard carry, but somebody caught him at the 2-yard line. Come on. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Bauer. Let's go.
Didn't Saquon Barkley? I remember being in a post game and somebody asked Saquon why he was almost caught on a kick return, and he's like, "I need to get faster from the 60 to the touchdown, like from yard 60 in the return." And I just thought, how bizarre of a conversation are we having right now? If you get 60 yards on a kick return, you've won. You've already won that particular play, and yet we're not. I don't even think that the media member was trying to nitpick Saquon Barkley. Just ask a question, but the way they phrased it was very much, "Why did you almost get caught, superhuman man who can run faster than anyone ever?"
Sir, explain yourself.
So that's a great question. 4 or 5 freshmen. The problem is that if we go to the quarterback position, which has the most impact, I don't know that all Big Ten freshman quarterback equals 11 wins or 10 wins. You can be an exemplary freshman quarterback and still make critical mistakes to lose your team important games. So that one's a little dicey to me if you're including the quarterback you can be good and just freshman is not all Big Ten good. It's all Big Ten freshman good.
But here's the thing, okay? Because I wanted to go back and look. Do you know who the freshman of the year was in the Big Ten last season?
Was it Trevian Henderson? Yes. Trevian Henderson would be the only one I would think of.
It was not. It was the quarterback for that same team, even though he was a second-year player, right?
Okay, because he was a redshirt freshman. Right, okay. Gotcha.
But there's kind of your answer is if you do get that type of performance from that position, right? He won a couple of awards.
Right.
Right. He won Offensive Player of the Year. He won Freshman of the Year. So if that's what you're going to get from that position, and look, I think that we've been honest about this throughout, that most of the indications are, one, with Sean Clifford's return, but two, just where these guys are between Bo Pribula, and Drew Allar, is that's probably what you're looking at, right? Is the possibility of a competition with Christian Veilleux next fall, right?
Yep.
Next summer for that starting job, and then maybe that opportunity exists. So we'll see.
What's your next player or next position if we're building out 4 or 5 all Big Ten players to make an impact? The obvious one right now, the clubhouse leader, is Zane Durant, which is more pressure up front. And this is where I'm going to save kind of the conversation about this particular position when it comes to impact until a little bit later. I think we have a question about this a little bit later. But he's the next one. So then you got pass rush. That certainly helps. I'm trying to find a good fit in this class for impact, positional value, and how that could elevate the team's expectations from what we think they are. And I think we've stated that pretty clearly on the show. Is there anybody else that stands out to you?
Well, look, like if you're asking about guys who come in with quite a few accolades, then I would look right. I would say Caden Saunders, but my counter to that is that they probably don't need him.
That's exactly right. Yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking, is that the receiver room is very deep and talented already. He's going to have to fight to get playing time, and then is he going to be so impactful that he changes the trajectory of that room? So is linebacker a big enough impact that you could put Keon Wiley or Abdul Carter in the conversation?
Sure. Potentially. I mean, I was just going to continue your thought there, but this is a very robust class of defensive backs, and they're entering into a program that is pretty strong at defensive back in terms of returning defensive backs. So there is a situation where you have established guys and people that are so good that you feel really good about where you're at going into the season, but maybe a freshman comes in and is so good, so over the top anyway. And actually, to be honest with you, this was something that Franklin brought up on Wednesday night and this was the first time that I had heard her say it in these terms. There are guys who will play, who they're seeing this spring, who can start, or maybe not start, but will be a factor on September 1. And then he said a second wave of players who can position themselves to be that factor in the second half of the season after a bye.
So when is their bye next year? Because that's going to be an important part of the conversation of when those reinforcements, the next wave happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 5 games into the year. So after the Northwestern game, which, that's, I think if you're setting things up, if you're drawing it up, that's a good place to have it, right? Like after a home game, you're still at home. They've got 2 weeks before that at home to begin with. And then, no pressure, but at Michigan on October 15th.
Right.
So,
and I don't want to get into projection of the record at that point, but you don't feel like at Auburn and at Purdue are unwinnable games. They could be close, but there's no team here, including Northwestern, another really tough team to beat. There's nobody here you're like, okay, that's a reasonable assumption for a loss. So the reason, and this is the reason I wanted to bring up KJ Winston when I was talking about potential players that could come in as kind of out of left field. I don't know at this point what the situation is behind Jonathan Sutherland at that Sam linebacker position. Is it Jamari Budden? Is it Jonathan Sutherland or a different position? Is it going to be a sub-package sort of season? And if that is an open question, KJ Winston has the physical size and the ability and the football intelligence to come in and make an impact at that position of the kind of 11th defender sub-package position. So if he could make plays in underneath coverage and be a physical safety in the run game, he's got all the tools to do that. But then it becomes, does Tyrese Mills cut in front of the line there as a JUCO player? Other guys on the roster, Daquan Hardy. It's just kind of a jumble there, but where there is that, there's also opportunity. So if that would be another area, I would put a pin in maybe one guy there.
I have one more spot that is a curveball in the same vein for you. Do you know where I'm going?
No. Not
good.
It's not
good.
Tight end, is it?
No, it's not. It's punter.
Yes, that's a good point. That is a very good point, and one that I typically overlook, which I've been open about at least. Yeah.
Hey,
having a really good punter.
Jordan Stout was really good. That will come to be something that people I think this. I mean, depending on what happens, but like you'll notice. You don't notice it when it's really really good because it's just so good all the time that there are really very few snafus away from that standard. And look, like either way, you've got a guy in Barney Moore who came to Penn State for this reason and seems to very much be a good punter. Right?
Yeah.
Like all indications are that he's a good punter. Is he quite to the level of Jordan Stout? I don't know that anybody's saying that right now. But certainly for his sake, you hope for the best for him. But then also Alex Paqueta, like he's supposed to be really good too.
Yeah.
Right. So,
yeah.
But either way, no matter who you're dealing with there, it's a guy who hasn't been in that position before.
Right.
Who doesn't have the reps in front of 100,000 people that Jordan Stout had, because that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
That is one of the first things that they always bring up is doing it in practice, doing it in Haluba Hall, doing it out on the Lash practice fields is radically different from because it's in fact, Stacey Collins called it this the other day when talking about kick return. It's a one-shot rep.
Yep.
Right? Like,
yeah.
You get 4 chances at a punt during a game. Like it is critical that those are on point.
So let's count them up. And we need to come to a consensus here, and then we'll decide how much better this makes Penn State to have dominate the all Big Ten freshman team. So we're going to say the locks that you and I are considering here to be denied Dennis-Sutton and Nick Singleton.
Sure.
The next player that we discuss here, is it a quarterback? Are we putting a quarterback in that discussion of one of the 4 to 5 freshmen on the all Big Ten team? I want to say no. Not just from hypothetical, but also from reality. Like in both situations, true freshman is so much different than redshirt freshman. Do you agree there? We're not going to be considering that position.
I'm sorry, I lost you there. What was the question? One more time.
We're trying to build a consensus of who the 4. We're going to limit it to 4 freshmen would be that give us an all Big Ten season. And then we're going to determine how much better that makes Penn State to answer the final part of the question. So we've got denied Dennis-Sutton, Nick Singleton. Are we considering, in our hypothetical scenario, a quarterback here?
Sure. For hypothetical sake, sure. Because look, like again, we're dealing with fantasy here, but we have a good idea of what Sean Clifford brings to the table, right? Which is at times good, sometimes not so good, but rarely all Big Ten.
Right.
I mean, I think is that fair? Like,
yeah,
is that a fair way to contextualize him? Because I don't think that's too hard on him. It's just saying, look, he's a guy who has not played to the level where he is going to, consistently bring home offensive player of the week awards. And he's won some. Like there's no question he's had some gaudy numbers, but to get that out of a full season, if you could get that out of a full season from your quarterback position, I think that would help Penn State football.
Okay, so then we're going to throw in a quarterback, and I'm just going to say quarterback because there's 2 freshman quarterbacks and then the punter. Is that enough to change our opinion of 7-5, 8-4, somewhere in there towards a 10-win season?
Yeah.
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 But the point is not any of the other players. It's not about Nick Singleton. It's not about denied Dennis-Sutton as much as it is the quarterback. That changes the dynamic to me, dramatically.
Maybe, but don't you think?
I just don't know I don't know how you add up the impact of 3 non-quarterbacks or 4 non-quarterbacks to change the topography of a team. Because the quarterback is so dominant in their importance and in their production that if you're saying there's an all Big Ten freshman quarterback who was good enough to beat out Sean Clifford and to be the starter from either day 1 or from week 5 on, there's so many things going on with the team that I don't see I guess I'm talking in two different ways here. As far
Well,
as
look,
like it would be so impactful that it would change everything about the season and what you expect.
don't you think, based on, this is a natural kind of transitive property of college football, that you're looking at what happened last season for a team. You understand that there are losses, people that leave the program, people that come into the program, but it's not a wholesale change. It rarely is a complete turnover. Okay. If I'm looking at last year's Penn State team, I saw a team that lost a bunch of games by 5 points, by 4 points. Okay. By whatever, even Ohio State was 9 points. So if that's the case, and you add a Nick Singleton to the mix, and there's a touchdown in there, right? Like, if Nick Singleton represents 7 points, if Dennis-Sutton represents 4 points in terms of, a strip sack, right?
Yeah.
Like, game-changing plays that Penn State couldn't make last season, right? Like, Penn State was not bad for most of the season. They just weren't. They didn't have those flash plays.
Yeah.
And so if you can bring those to the table, and if those can happen, and if those are the players who bring it to the table, then sure, I do think it could mean the difference of a win or two over the course of the year.
Well, we have spent a good bit of time on this question. We've got about 15 more to get to. Poncho 570 asks, like it or not, NIL is here to stay. Schools, typically in the southern schools with big NIL deals, are getting the best players more often than not. How much do you think that is going to overinflate an assistant coach's value, not only when it comes to player development, but also when they're looking to step up the ladder as either a coordinator or a head coach? Do you think that just having access to the best possible materials, I think is what Poncho was saying, is going to make you a better coach than you actually are? Is that something you should be aware of?
Yeah, but that was already the case.
That's kind of what I was thinking of. Like, this dynamic already exists. And here's the other thing, is that for the most part, unless you're dealing with a school that is wantonly poor in management, and we know the ones that have constant turnover in their staff from the head coach down, the best teams are the best talent evaluators, and that doesn't mean just on the field. So you're not going to be getting guys going to Alabama to coach or to Georgia to coach that are tomato cans that are just there throwing the football out there and letting first-round picks dominate other people. They're actually good at their job too, because there's pressure on everybody. So don't go to a program that doesn't have an established winning culture to find your assistants, I guess.
I tend to think that there are a lot of very good assistant coaches. I don't think that it's players. First of all, there's a lot of very good players.
Yeah.
Elite players are rare. Okay. There are a lot of very good assistant coaches, but assistant coaches and head coaches, everyone is made better by the most good talent, great talent that you have around you, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Right? Like, in any capacity in a football program,
Yeah.
it's going to lift others. And so I think that's definitely the case. It's just, like, I don't see a situation where somebody who doesn't pull their weight on an assistant coaching staff, who doesn't recruit well, doesn't do most things, but happens to land a stud, whatever, right? A stud player at their position, automatically just like rockets up the hiring list of other coaches. Like, I don't see that.
So it can happen again if you don't have a good head coach or you don't have a good organization. I think that part of this too is we tend to over romanticize taking a 2-star and making him a 3-star. Of like, look at all the talent you got out of this guy, and it's just, you might be, and going back to the car analogy, you might be a great mechanic on really basic cars, like just, economy cars. But is that the same value as getting every single performance boost percentage? Maybe it's 1% out of the best possible material. So I'm not saying that they're entirely separate. You're going to have coaches that could coach anybody. You're going to have coaches that can get the most out of some players. I just don't know that. And Iowa keeps coming to mind when I talk about this, of like consistently good at certain basic discipline things and basic principles and getting guys to be big and strong. And then what does it get you? Are you capable of then taking all of that success and translating it into excellence when it comes to recruiting and development of already great players? And we romanticize the idea of the 3-star becoming a 4-star, the 1-star, the walk-on becoming a good player. And I think that you need to kind of also know that the very elite are also very elite for a reason.
Well said. You can have a garage full of Ford Tauruses that will finish the race.
Yep.
And if your Ferrari breaks down, then yes, you will lose to the Taurus. That is what will happen. But if all things are equal and the Ferrari doesn't break down, Ferrari's going to win the race.
But there is the old parable about the Taurus and the that was a terrible joke.
The Taurus?
The Taurus and the hare.
Keep going.
I did not land the joke, but it was well conceived. Psychim asks, on the roster printed in this month's edition of the BWI magazine, which, Nate, give us a promo for the BWI magazine.
I just published a story about Nick Singleton that I wrote that I thought came out really, really well. Buy it. Buy the magazine. You can buy. There is a specific link for the magazine at bluewhiteonline.com.
Excellent.
It's a great investment. You can have it in your hands.
And I like nice things, and the magazine feels very nice.
Sure.
Okay, let's get to this. So this month's edition of the BWI magazine, Devon Townley Jr., 6'6", 268 pounds. Phil Gross is very high on him, founder of Blue White Illustrated. Rodney McGraw, 6'5", 271, considered. They had large weight gains on the roster. Any reports on these guys? Do they show the athleticism and quickness down the road to be effective pass rushers? Then he goes into, and we'll get to this here in a second with some of the defensive tackles. Any update on McGraw or Devon Townley Jr.?
No.
Yeah, same here. I have not. So, this is the situation. We've been in Haluba Hall most of the time this spring. I have not seen the defensive line enough to know if Devon Townley Jr. or Rodney McGraw are even practicing. Just to give context to it, it has been a very limited spring for me anyway.
I tend to think, and I think this is probably the best way to put it, that between James Franklin, the assistants, right, the people who speak to the media, there's two trains of thought, right? One is they will answer questions about whoever they're asked about. Okay. So that's universally true, right? If you ask them directly a question, so no one has asked, to my knowledge, a question specifically this spring about Devon Townley Jr. or McGraw.
Yep.
So that exists, right? Like that is a possible hole. However, the other truth is, when given open-ended opportunities to bring up players who are doing well, if they were doing well, to the point where, it's this standout, breakout, lights out situation, that they would be brought up.
Yep.
That opportunity would be taken advantage of, because you see it all over the roster at other places.
Yep.
Right.
And players too, when we ask about this, neither name has come up. And you wouldn't expect a player to be as polished and maybe you could say calculated as a coach that is, done this for a long time and knows what to say and what not to say. They're briefed and they're given like, hey, don't mention X, Y, or Z. But, just when you start talking, you mention guys, and neither of these guys have come up. What about Cole Brevard? Because that's the next guy. Can he handle being a nose tackle at 332? And has there been any sort of mention of him? He's been one that's, I think, interesting, but I put him in the same bucket as the first two.
No.
Just no.
No. I mean, has there been mention? Has there been anything on Cole Brevard this spring?
No.
No. The answer is no. And look, this is I want to bring this up because I think it's important. with Penn State not talking directly about injuries, you just don't know.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Like there is the possibility that these guys are working through some stuff, some of these guys at least. Right. And then there's another possibility that maybe they just haven't progressed at the rate that, some fans might hope for.
Yeah. Because I thought,
it,
going back to the original question from Psychium, is like, I thought in the max testing day and from what I saw of him, that Devon Townley Jr. looked like he had done a great job this offseason at taking a step forward physically. And that was the last time we heard anything or saw anything of him. And that's why I say, like, I haven't even seen him, but that does not mean he's not there. That just means that my attention is very focused, but it is an open-ended question of, is he there? I don't know.
Yeah, I have not gotten that sense yet. It does not mean that it's not a possibility, right? Like that.
I guess we'll find out on Saturday.
Happen. Well, I mean, you'll find out on Saturday, and you'll really find out. And this is always the important thing to bring up. Like, it's April.
Yeah.
Like, things can change. People come on over the summer, right? People fade over the summer. Like that is something that happens, and we'll be keeping an eye on it. But right now, yeah, I mean, it's not front and center on the radar for sure.
Bob asks the BWI surprise player of the game, who we will never see. Bob E. Oh,
come on now.
Sorry,
Bob.
Well, it's all lowercase. There's no indication of anything here. Anyway, the BW surprise player of the game, who we will never see again, is.
You go first. I need to think about this. I need to look.
Yeah, well, I'm currently looking right now. The first name that comes up here is Mason Stahl, but I think that's unfair to Mason Stahl.
Well, and I don't like the phrasing because I don't want it to sound. You know what I mean? Like,
how about here we go. I'm just going to answer this for you, Nate, and I'm going to take this bullet for the team. We're going with Jace Tutty because I did not know until looking right now that Jace Tutty was on the Penn State football roster. So Jace Tutty is from Stroudsburg. Good for him. He is 5'11", 188 pounds, and I'm talking about Jace Tutty as much as possible to give him as much pub as possible before I then say something mean of like, I didn't know he was on the team, and he may be the guy for Bob E. We're going to move on.
Dominic DeLuca, linebacker.
There you go. There's another good one. Navy Blue asks, we obviously want to see multiple players at defensive end step up and provide an improved, consistent pass rush. Are we underestimating what Penn State might be able to get from the interior group? Izzard, Ellis, Mulba, Vandenberg, and other guys. And then, if we get PJ back, he goes on to say, the position could look like a strength. Like 1978 when Larry Kubin put up 15 sacks at defensive end, but Matt Millen and Bruce Clark were the unblockable duo at defensive tackle that made his job a lot easier. Your response to Navy Blue?
T-Frank, correct me if I'm wrong. PJ Mustipher was playing very well when he got hurt last year.
Very well.
Okay. So I would say, and I don't know if it's wishful thinking. I don't know, look, like James Franklin said on Wednesday night that he thought, and some of you never know, right? I mean, it's the human body. It's a total mystery.
Yep.
Whether or not he's like ahead of schedule, quote unquote.
Yep.
If he is, and he can get back to something approximating and or the same and or better than the way that he was playing last season, that's a force. That is a game changer for Penn State on the interior of the line. Everything from there is, I'm not saying gravy necessarily, but it puts you in a very, very strong spot. I think Hakeem Beamon, if he's not being talked about, he should be talked about.
Yeah.
Like if he can work through all the stuff that kept him off the field last year, but can make him a factor this year, he's going to play. He was going to start last year.
So the two things here. The first is that PJ Mustipher, how do I want to phrase this? Bigger athletes, I think, have a harder time coming back and playing at the same level they were previously than smaller athletes because of the weight and the force that they generate on their own bones. So, a knee injury for PJ Mustipher, who needs to do exercise to keep his weight under control. And I think he's been doing a good job of that. I haven't seen him get massive or anything, but he's a big dude. So how do you know what the composition of that weight is? James Franklin said that he was starting to run again. He's got a brace that he likes, but what is the power? And what is the ability to do that quickly with force in multiple directions? What's the belief in that? Players that I've seen come back at that position, it takes them more than a year to be effective. And that to me is the biggest thing, is he can play, sure. And if they want him on target for the first week of the season, for him to be suited up, but is that PJ Mustipher? And I'm going to say the same thing that I said about Noah Cain, whose game was based on lower body strength. If you have a lower body injury and you are not lifting, you will not have lower body strength. You just, it's physically impossible. So he is going to be the smart player, the veteran that's in the right position that can absorb some double teams. But is he beating double teams? I just do not think that is a reasonable thing for him, even a year on, 18 months, and then we're into the end of the season. So I'm not expecting anything from PJ Mustipher about what he was last season. Now, can he be a contributor and can he be a helpful presence? Yes, but not 100%. That happens the year after or, 20 months after. That to me is in my brain how I'm looking at this. And if he's ahead of schedule and he proves me wrong, I think that's great. But then you're not disappointed in PJ Mustipher and you're not angry at why he's bad, because he has not been able to lift heavy weights with his legs. So when heavy weights are pushed on him and force is enacted, he does not have the training and the pushback to use. It makes too much sense.
And I'm the guy who loves the story. So my brain works as, if there's anybody who can defy science and all reason, it might be PJ Mustipher.
I would love, but for his sake, I would love to be wrong.
Exactly. And I share the sentiment that you don't want him to be in a position where there's more pressure on him, like an expectation for him to be able to duplicate that. So no, I think that's fair.
The other half of this is that we're talking about pressure. We're talking about pass rush. And PJ has never been a pass rusher. So to the point of pass rush, it is easier to get pressure from the edge because it is harder to double team edge players. That's why it is the premier, it is the most important position, because Zane Durant can be unblockable and he can still be blocked by two guys. Now, is he taking up a double team? Yes. That is giving your defensive ends one-on-ones with multiple ways to win, or if you then keep more guys in to block, less players out in the route, less time for the quarterback to scan and find players, etc., etc. There's always a domino effect in football. But defensive tackle pressure is just inconsistent. And when you find an Aaron Donald, because everyone wants to compare every defensive tackle now to Aaron Donald, think more Fletcher Cox, think more Kevin Givens. Those guys can be blocked, but they set everyone else up for success. So it's very hard, even if you've got depth, to find consistent, dominant force on the interior, which, by the way, is why you move big physical defensive ends to 3 technique on obvious pass rushing situations. They're just better set up to win in those situations. It's a hard thing to duplicate edge pressure from the interior. Here's our favorite question, Nate. If Clifford is not effective early on, how long does it take Franklin to pull the trigger, go with one of the younger QBs, and build for the future? This is from Foxnit, one of our Blue White Illustrated members.
I don't like the phrasing, because I don't think, that the part where it says build for the future is just like a non-starter.
Right.
It doesn't.
James Franklin has given up on 2022. He's decided that it's over, and we're going to pack it in for all of these seniors that have dedicated their time. We're just not going to worry about this year.
What quarterback gives you the best opportunity to win? That is the one who will play. Not win 12 months from now, not win 36 months from now. Who gives you the best chance to win that day? That's it. That's the equation.
Jeff Laws asks, special teams is an important aspect for any team. What kicker or combination of kickers do you expect to be on the field in the fall? This is something you've been thinking about and talking about a little bit more recently because of the massive blind spots in Blue White Illustrated's video coverage of special teams.
So I think that, there's going to be some competition at hand.
Yeah.
Is just the bottom line is, I think Sahidek will challenge Jake Pinniger, and, Jake Pinniger brings experience. He brings, which should not be understated, right? Like, that experience is valuable, and he's been through it. But yeah, I mean, I think Sahidek, I think they liked him last year. I think they still like him. And so, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a data crunch as to who is the guy who stands out there. And then at punter, Barney Moore, Gabriel Nwosu, and the new kid, right? Alex Paqueta coming in this summer, I think, right? Like, all three of those, here's how I would handicap it. I think Amore is the leader currently, and I think Nwosu could be a kickoff specialist. I think he might be a guy who can handle that.
Yeah,
and because he's got a big leg, and then Paqueta is like, if Paqueta comes in and is as good as advertised, he's number one Coles kicker in the country this year. Like, if he's that good, then maybe you've set yourself up where you've got a bonus, right, situation to enjoy, where your really good option, Barney Moore, is it just comes up a little bit short of, this otherworldly option at punter. But my money right now would be on Amore to be able to hold that job down.
We're going to switch over to Twitter for our last couple of questions here. And we are now in the presence of royalty because Nittany Queen Twitter handle Heather Ashley asks, this isn't about the blue-white game, but with the NFL draft looming, how often are former JUCO players like Jaquan Brisker selected in the first or second round? And might that be a testament to the JUCO gems we want? I'm not sure about the second part of the question, but I think it's not... I wouldn't say it's common, as in 50% of the players in the first or second round are JUCO players, but it is not at all an oddity. You wouldn't bat an eyelash at seeing a JUCO player being drafted in the first or second round, because there's a lot of reasons you go to JUCO. And there's a lot of, you take quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers started out at a JUCO college before he got picked up by Cal. And Josh Allen, same thing. Now, those guys, a little bit of a different story in terms of Josh Allen grew 5 inches or 4 inches in college. But there are just, in general, guys that go to JUCO routes for different reasons. But traditionally, most of them are 4- and 5-star athletes. On3 has a tracker, by the way, where you can look at the number of 4 and 5, the first-round draft picks in the NFL draft, and what they were when in recruiting. And the majority are 4- and 5-star athletes. So it's not odd, but it is also not uncommon, if that makes sense.
Well, and I mean, Brisker was, I believe, a 4-star, and just academically, he wasn't in the right shape to be able to, so like, I think that is, it's a wild card. I mean, people have, Jaquan's backstory, for him to be where he is like tremendous. I mean, I did a story with him last year on him, the things that he has overcome, the situations that he's been through. His brother was murdered. Like, it's just a lot. And like those stories are everywhere. Right. And you can't predict who they are or when they'll come, but people have different paths to get to where they're going, but he has taken a path that, allows him to be in this situation, that he is right now. Yeah.
I think well said. Let's move on to Ben on Twitter. The spring game is also, I love this one. The spring game is the unofficial return of tailgating and grilling. What kind of tailgaters would T-Fank and Nate be? Low key with fam, hyped up with students listening to Dua Lipa. Nate, I love this question because I think it says a lot about you and I. So do you want to go first?
No, you go first.
Okay.
What do you got?
So I have been accused multiple times of my wife fairly being bougie. So that's accurate. I don't like doing, and this is it. How do I phrase this? I'm not against, because I grew up in the country farming, doing crap like that. So I'm not against any one thing. I've grown up in multiple ways. I just am fixated. I have EST syndrome. What is the biggest, best, fast, smartest, best way to do something? So I want, there's this tailgate I've seen for years. It is a tent in the commuter parking lot with 3 televisions set up inside. Basically, you're setting up a living room in the parking lot. So I'm not saying I'm stodgy or I'm against people coming over and having a rager, because I think that's also important. But sure, I want to do it the right way. So we're having like a gas grill, TVs, a lounge. We're doing it up right. It's going to be really nice.
Wow. That
would be my ideal tailgate.
And here's where I'm coming from, which is I'm the type of tailgater that likes going to other people's tailgates. And so as long as I'm not the person who has to set it up and get it together, organize it, put everything right, like if I can walk to your tailgate and I don't,
you'll
really
never
care
find
what
it.
The tailgate.
You will never find it.
Like. I'm not invited?
No, this is my point. So this is the other thing, is like when I have tried to tailgate with people, they're like, hey, I'll let you know where we are, where we're tailgating. Call me on game day. And it's like, there's no way I'm going to find you. So like that.
You gotta have some reliable, consistent parkers.
Yeah.
Right. You need the numbered space parkers. That's
exactly.
An essential element there.
So like going to other people's tailgates is great unless you can't ever find them, which is most times the reality.
People ask me to tailgate. It never happens. I need to be at the stadium.
Yep.
And I can't do the one thing that makes tailgating so fun.
Right.
So like, why would I subject myself to that? If I can't be boozed up before a game, what's the point?
Yeah. So no half measures. We're not doing things where we're going and chatting and I'm having a hot dog. Like, I'm tailgating or I'm working, and I have work anxiety. So I don't tailgate. Beaverman72 says Zakee Wheatley leads the team in takeaways. And also seems willing to stop the run. From a fan's perspective, it would seem as though he should be one of the starting safeties given the praise he's received. Do you expect him to start? Which safety position fits him best? I want you to address the first part of the question. I'll get to the second part about what safety position fits him best and do you expect him to start. What do you think about this particular thought train?
Well, what about Jalen Reed?
Right.
Like, what happened to him? When you say one of the starting safeties, okay, if we're going to expand the starting holes, right, roster spots to fill, to say that there's 4 starting safeties, then sure, I'm fine with that. He should be a starting safety.
Yep.
But you know that Tig Brown's going to be on the field. He's got to be on the field.
Yep.
And so who are you taking off the field? Is it Keaton Ellis? Is it Jalen Reed? I don't know. And so that, like, I see Wheatley as a nice story this spring who is probably facing a situation where he'll need to wait a year before he becomes like the top rep getter.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So that's, I think that dynamic kind of plays itself out every spring, where even last year, right? Like, Kalen King had a really nice spring and was a breakout, and the ball loved him, and all of those things, which are true. And he was the 3rd or 4th highest rep getter among the corners, right? Because like, you're not taking Tariq Castro-Fields and Joey Porter Jr. off the field for Kalen King, no matter how much he's flashed.
Yep.
It's just, that's kind of the reality on the backside of these stories.
I'm still, and I'm not getting off the cell. I'm still a little bummed that he's not at corner because I love 6'2" long corners with long arms and kind of that condor-like press ability. But at safety and having the confidence of playing in man coverage, this is what James Franklin always says, the confidence of playing in man coverage at safety is valuable. And if you look at every other safety that has, or almost every other safety that's transitioned over time, they have gone from corner to field safety, and then like this year, I believe Keaton Ellis is competing for that boundary safety, the strong safety position. So just based on logic, he would be the field safety this year, which, by the way, as you pointed out, is where Tig Brown sets up shop. So, no, I would not expect Zakee Wheatley to be the starter. Can he contribute and be an impact player still? Absolutely. Absolutely. Sure. And I think he fits at both positions. So I think he can play either with his frame, but 6'2", 191, a little bit more of a free safety than a strong safety, but he can get up to 200 pounds. He can be the complete package. I think he can play either position. It's just the physical maturity and just the way they've done this is you don't skip the process unless you are already that size. So, again, I mentioned KJ Winston. He can come in, and I think he can play that strong safety position. That's his natural position because he's already that big as a freshman. Coming from corner, I think you start at the field, then you work to the boundary if you have the ability. Even early in his career, I believe I have this correct, that in 2019, Jaquan Brisker played the field. He did not play the boundary until his final season.
Yeah, I am at this point of the mindset that we can somewhat get rid of the name designations, right? Because those safeties are kind of cross-trained to do both. Like they're all going to see snaps, and you see it in the snap counts after the fact. They all kind of do both things. So
you need to be able to do both.
Correct. I don't think it's a hard and fast situation.
And not to undo everything we just said, but that is also in Brent Pry's defense. I've seen a little bit more rigidity in the past from Manny Diaz of here's our free, here's our strong. We're playing in this particular system. But I've also seen him play cover 2. So, it's going to be determined a lot in the fall. And we'll learn a lot of that together by design. They don't want me to know so I can tell you, and it's really frustrating. So John Walker, Papa John 630 asks how many positions have been affected by the O-line player. I'm sorry. How many positions has the lack of O-line affected player development? Is there not enough to run a scout team? It appears that all positions can be affected one way or another, but which has felt the largest impact? James Franklin talked about the quarterback position. I thought that was very interesting of not having a third and fourth offensive line has limited the live reps the third and fourth quarterback have gotten until they change some things up. So what did he say yesterday about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, he said that neither of the true freshman quarterbacks necessarily had huge expectations. I think that he said that they had low expectations in terms of how many reps they would actually get this spring. And he said that both told him that they felt like they had exceeded that, right? That they had been able to get more reps. However, and you're going to have to clarify this for me because I always mess it up. There's thud reps and skelly reps. He said that they hadn't gotten enough team reps. Right.
Yeah.
So they hadn't, those quarterbacks behind Sean Clifford had not been able to take enough reps with the offensive line. And so really what he said was they shut Clifford down for each of the past 2 practices where Clifford didn't participate in the team reps because they wanted to get those other quarterbacks some opportunities there. I think, is that an appropriate way to phrase that?
Yeah. So that's kind of the idea of a progression in intensity where skeleton reps are, and I don't know the exact definition, but it's like 7-on-7, a little bit more than 7-on-7 where you're a little more intense, you're going a little bit harder, and it's just the skeleton of it. Literally, it's stripped down football. And then thud is everyone's going 80%, you wrap up, but you don't go to the ground. And then full team reps, live contact is full out football. That's a scrimmage. And when you get to that progression, with Penn State not wanting to expose people to extended amounts of hitting, and you really can't at times, there wasn't a third or fourth offensive line to give Caden Wallace and Juice Scruggs and Olaf Ashanu a break, so they weren't getting as many of those reps, hence Clifford not participating, getting the first team reps, and everyone intermingling, taking him out of the equation and giving those reps to the young guys. And that's kind of what he was talking about of, sure, you can go with as many DBs and tight ends and wide receivers, but when it's real and it's thud and you've got the offensive line hitting somebody and the running backs putting a shoulder into somebody, they needed to eliminate the quarterback and that logjam to get more reps for the other guys.
I genuinely have no actual insight here, but I'd be very surprised if we see more than a series or two for Sean Clifford on Saturday.
We Are Recruiting asks, will we know the starting linebackers after the blue-white game? No, we will not. Do you disagree?
No, I think that's pretty fair. I think, and have said previously, my sense this spring is that Tyler Elsdon is currently somewhere between a step or a few steps ahead of Kobe King at that Mike linebacker position. I think that you can probably pencil in John Sutherland as a starter. I know that you can pen in Curtis Jacobs as a starter.
Yeah. We're getting that engraved.
Like maybe you use a disappearing ink pen on the Elsdon situation, right? Where you reserve the right to change, and I think that's what they want. They want that competition to go through the summer, and they'll have the opportunity to do that. It's just a matter of, hey, at this stage in the game, it certainly looks to me as though Elsdon is a little bit ahead in that.
And he provides, I think, what we've talked about before of stability. He is a good run defender. I think that everyone has a sour taste in their mouth from the bowl game, but when you go back and review the film, if you're a linebacker and either a guy next to you or somebody in front of you is not fitting their gap correctly, and you're the Mike linebacker, it just always looks like it's your fault. But he was in his gap. I thought he did a good job playing through contact. It's just, what else is he? How's he as a coverage defender? Is he consistently getting there against all types of linemen? Any of those number of things like we talk about with Christian Veilleux or Malik Mega or other guys we saw a limited sample size of, when they're stressed in other positions and the overall athleticism, all those things, we just don't have the full picture. But I know he's a good, sound player. And it's just, filling in the rest of the details.
Yeah, they're both going to play, and we're going to have those answers by the end of next season, maybe by the middle of next season.
Yeah, and by next fall, there will be more players that are entering the competition. So we'll find that out then as well. That does it today for the BWI Daily Edition. If you're listening on our podcast, as always, thank you. You are not forgotten. I know I always mention the YouTube channel. We're staring down the barrel of the camera here, but you guys are the best. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow, wrapping up things with the week, talking to Ryan Snyder about visitors this weekend in recruiting. Stay tuned. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. That's Nate Bauer. We'll talk to you later.